All right, folks, welcome to the Fully Remote Talk Show. I'm Arjun, the host of the Fully Remote Talk Show, the first talk show for leaders who are adapting their style to a fully remote world. We are on episode 11 today, and we are talking about building a high-performing remote engineering team. Again, this is a continuation of a topic that we spoke about 2 weeks back, where we were talking about interviewing engineering talent, remote engineering talent specifically. So we will kind of continue on that, but we also want to talk about what does it mean to have a high performing engineering team. And I think this is a pretty broad topic, high performing engineering team. So we're going to take like a few topics that are more relevant for remote engineering and like discuss that around how do you execute, how do you bring team to stay committed and motivated, and then also around communication. All of these are getting significantly affected when it comes to like now adapting to a remote first world. These are topics that people who have been doing remote for a while have an idea of, but many of us are adapting to. But we have an expert among us, and this is somebody that we already know who is going to be here. Welcome to the show, Vivek. This is exciting to have you back on the show. For those who don't know Vivek, he is an engineering leader. He has been an engineering leader for the last couple of decades right now. And he is a founder of SDE Skills, which is literally making life easy for engineers who are trying to join some of these globally high, historically great companies that are changing the world, like Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, and helping them interview well and like join their companies. You can follow him on LinkedIn. You can click the LinkedIn link is right over there. But one thing that we really love when Vivek came to the show 2 weeks back is he talked about empathy and giving, like playing the long game of giving to the community. And I think we took that to heart. That was big highlights for our last show. Again, welcome Vivek. Welcome to the show.
Awesome. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, awesome. We want to ask a lot of questions to Vivek, but before that, I'm going to do the usual tradition of checking in with all you people over here. Again, this is an interactive show, so go ahead and type the answer, like a one word or a phrase answer on the box over there about what kind of tree would you be. Again, this is abstract to the point where the idea is to like make you think a little bit outside the box, think about things that are not really related to a Thursday evening. And if you were a tree, when I asked this question is when I realized I really don't know that many names of trees is what I realized, but few came to mind. And so I'm going to type that. So I'll give another few seconds for people to come up with like a good tree over here. I mentioned this is an interactive show. This is also to say that get into the habit of participating. We'd love to have you talk in the show, be part of the conversation over here. You are all here to add color to the show, and I love that when you participate. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna see what.
Are you able to see the answers, Arjun?
Now we can see what.
Okay.
Now you should all be able to see what everybody has typed. Banyan seems like a big favorite over here. Binary tree. Well done. Well done. I think this is the crowd. This is the crowd that I thought it would be. Bristlecone pine. I don't know what that is. Banana, cherry, mahogany, dragon tree, mango tree. Oh, love it. Palm tree. Looks like palm and banyan are like the two trees that I knew as well. This is awesome. So whatever tree you are, it's great to have you represented over here. We're all under one big tree right now, participating in this. With that, I'm going to jump to like the interview section over here. Again, for people who want to ask questions of Vivek, you can always raise hands, come up on stage, and then ask a question. But I have a lot of questions that I'm going to start off with, especially like finishing off where we started, right? Like just to recap, we discussed about the interviewing process, what happens before, how do you do like a job description, like the screening, and then how do you do a job description, or an interview round, how do you make decisions on that. I think we didn't quite touch about like the whole salary negotiation part of it, but that's not too relevant to remote first. So I'm going to ask this sort of money question right now with you, Vivek, is when somebody is joining a fully remote engineering team, what should you ask of the hiring manager or the recruiter before you join that? And again, many people will have great ideas over here, so feel free to raise hand and come up and give your thoughts on this. But Vivek, what are your top takeaways on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd absolutely love to hear what others have to say about this as well. But I have a few things that just immediately come to mind. So, number one is it does look like COVID has forced most of the teams to start working remote to some extent. So, there's always this we have evolved process to be retrofit into whatever the new remote world looks like. So, the thing that I want to ask when I were to join a remote first engineering team or fully remote engineering team would be to actually find out whether this is going to be the new norm. I don't want them to be thinking about like, hey, you know what, I'm going to hire remote because I can, but I also want to be figuring out how to get back to office and then get back in person and then try to focus on that. I don't want the remote engineering team to be like a second class citizen in the equation, right? So how would you make that work? And I think the part there is that I don't think you can like unless the company has a fully remote work culture. A few companies do have that. It's very difficult to actually avoid like a hybrid work setup, which means few engineers or few managers and whatever else would be in office, and then a few of them would be remote. And my question would actually be focused on like how are you handling it, what's your strategy, and how do you plan to deal with that. And the last one that I would look for is actually, I think one of the things is that uh, a remote friendly or remote first team should know how to deal with some of the concerns that happen typically. Like, most commonly what I've seen is that they have like a budget to get people together, like once a
Mm.
quarter, once a half, once a year, or whatever that cadence looks like. If they're not thinking about it, then they're not thinking about the remote engineering team themselves at all. So my questions would be like, what's your thought, like how are you actually trying to build a culture? How are you trying to bring the team together? Like, is there an opportunity to get in sync in some shape or form and things like that? So that'll be one. And the second major concern that I have about fully remote teams is actually time zones are going to be a real pain, especially because we are across. It may be, I mean, fully remote essentially means that you could have someone right on the other side of the world, like maybe India, maybe Australia, and EMEA or whatever, and that makes it impossible for us to collaborate across time zones. And uh, I think one of the things I'd love to see is if the company has like a purposeful, like a very methodical approach to how they're dealing with time zones. Do they actually are they building collaboration esque things where you're looking at saying, hey, you know what, this is like North America zone, this is like EMEA zone or APAC zone or whatever, and are they actually building teams which are not necessarily co-located, but actually in the same time zone or in similar time zones, and that'll be a few things. I think the way I think of all questions is start with like what is the problem I'm trying to anticipate and identify. And I think one is around the team getting back to work, and the second thing is around they're like completely free for all, they've not even thought about how it's going to work, and I don't want to work 24/7. So I just want to make
Love
sure
it.
that the time zone is reasonable.
Love it. I think these are like key points, right? Like, I feel like, are you fully committed to the remote first world in terms of like not treating them as second class, thinking about the time zone, thinking about team building and like the motivation? Love these things. I'm going to give a minute to see if anybody else has any other questions that they have asked before joining a remote engineering team, or now that as leaders, are you seeing your employees ask? I'd love to like see that. So feel free to raise hand and like come and give me your answers over here. Anybody? Um, let's give it another 10-15 seconds. I know that the silence usually helps bring people to like come and talk over here. But I think these points that you mentioned, Vivek, are super relevant because I think that's what like the rest of the conversation is going to be about. And in that, like I'm gonna like set the stage for it while we're waiting for somebody to say some of their ideas. Is there are three things that are top of mind for me, as I just mentioned earlier, is around what is how are we going to like make sure that the team executes. And I think this is relevant even otherwise, but when it comes to a remote team, you're across time zones, you don't probably see these people at all. How are you going to make sure that these people execute? And then the second thing is about like commitment and motivation, and I think you touched upon those things, and we will double click on that. And then the third thing is about communication. Again, time zones and other things. We'll talk about this, but like Prakash has something that he wants to say. So Prakash, thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. I don't have a question per se, but then kind of just to add to what Vivek said, is it's important to be in a company that's inclusive, right?
Mm,
And a lot of the companies are, especially the bigger companies, are still figuring out how the remote policy is going to work, right? Now the whole remote for the whole remote policy was enforced during the COVID
mm,
times. They didn't really want it, right? From the smaller companies, I used to work for a much smaller company. They saw a benefit. They were saving millions, right? It had 40, 50 people in it, and it was a no brainer. Get the work done. They know that it's a startup. You have to get the work or you get fired, kind of thing. Now bigger companies like Microsoft, and Google, they've invested millions and millions, right? So they don't want to go remote first, because the question is, we've bought all these real estate, what are we going to do with that, right? Google invested $1.4 billion in New York, right? $1 billion, so that's a lot of money they invested. So the important part is, right during the interview phase itself, you have to talk to recruiters to see what the remote policy is. And and you have to be very honest and forthcoming, saying I'm going to be remote, right? And there is proof in the pudding here, so to say, because that's what I did, right? I work completely remote for a Seattle based company, which is on the west coast of US. So
yeah,
and one of the things that the recruiter did tell was that I work for Microsoft, and the recruiter did say that it's a very inclusive company. So
right,
it's important to be a part of such a culture to ensure that you won't be a second class citizen,
right.
right? So but
That's
but
a
it's
yeah.
sorry,
Sorry,
go ahead.
finish. I'll let you finish your thought, but like great points over there. I'll let you finish your thought.
Yeah. So as a part of the culture itself, inclusivity is a part of the main culture points. So you got to make sure that people live by what they say they do, right? And so that's one thing you have to
Yeah,
do that. It's not everyone has a very clear idea about the remote policy. People are still, it's been 2 years since COVID, but still people are still figuring out how to work this out with multiple zones, and things like that. One thing that worked in my benefit was a lot of the out the time zones, for whatever reason, is based off of Bangalore and based off of US, right?
right.
That's a higher hit on the from a percentage wise. So
So
living on
yeah,
the
I think
East Coast, I had experience, had some kind of overlap with the
right.
Bangalore team and here, so that kind of worked in my favor. But then you could have a remote team based off in Europe, or in other places. I in some way lucked out that Microsoft has a remote team in Bangalore. I had the uh, living in the East Coast. There's a time overlap there, so it kind of worked out. But yeah, just a general statement over what
Got
Vivek
it.
said.
Great point, Prakash. I think you added like a couple of really good, colorful things. There's some places there. I mean, like the whole idea of inclusion and like integrity, whether people like are able to do what they're saying that they're doing. Those are very important points. And then there is it's not equal for everybody. People could be in like very very different things. Great point. I'm gonna jump to some of these questions that we have, and I think one part that maybe what Prakash said, like I'm thinking about, and maybe you could quickly comment on this, Vivek, is there is this thought of the sunk cost fallacy that like I've invested in real estate and like we have all like now we have to like stick to that part of it. Uh, do you see this as more? And I know that there is no way that you can answer this for like companies like Meta or Amazon, but like, do you see this as like a thing that they're going to do for a while until like remote is going to become the mainstream, or do you think there is going to be a hybrid work style that's going to get set?
So as actually Prakash was talking about it, that was like the first words popped in my head was like, hey, this sounds like sunk cost fallacy, and you just use the
Right.
same phrasing. So the challenge here is actually quite what I have seen, at least in my 11 plus years at Amazon, as I was going through the hiring exercises, like explosive growth. And no, like we just can't get real estate fast enough. Like, spinning up offices, setting up of the teams. Like I move pretty much like every year or even less than every like 8 months or 9 months. I'm just moving, and the joke I used to make was essentially like, Amazon actually is kind of arranging people like how I arrange my fridge. So every now and then, like there's nothing, I don't have space. I just like randomly move things up and say, oops, suddenly I have a space for a can of milk now or something like that. And I don't know where the space comes from. It just like randomly happens. And that's a joke we used to make. It's like every 6 to 8 months, it automatically you're moving between offices. It's like a pain. And what I realized is that the company is growing much, much faster, and we're not able to anticipate the growth. At one end, hiring is very difficult, but the other extreme is that, like, if you're successful, you have a different problem now. You don't have
Right.
space for your teams. And I think at least the way I see it is Meta has kind of committed, I think, to be 50% of their workforce remote by 3 years or something like that is a number I've heard somewhere. Don't quote me on this, but that's like a public statement that they've made, or I read it somewhere else. So that I think it's a pretty smart move, because one, you've got talent everywhere and you can tap into that. And the second thing is that you're not really limited by real estate, right?
Right.
And we're growing faster than what the space can catch up with. And again, there are like a lot of tools now which actually help us with this remote work environment a lot more. Like, tools like Zinc. I think the metaverse is like a big bet there as well, where a lot of other interesting things are actually happening. I don't know how far it'll catch up and pick up. It's probably many years in the future, but I think there is an opportunity for us to double down on essentially making this collaborative remote work environment as like something that is the norm, and make it work like and make it work in a hybrid model. And that's where I think the sunk cost fallacy will go away, I think.
Right. Yeah, good point. Thanks for the Zinc plug over there. I love it because yeah, we are obviously betting on like the fully remote world, or at least like a remote friendly world taking off, and being able to add more tools that will like make that as real for remote people as it is for people who are in person. So that's a great point. So sort of jumping on again, a question around like execution. So you're building a high performing engineering team, and first of all, like how do you know your team is executing well? And again, this is goes to like metrics, goes to measurement, like goes to some of those things, but also on like from a field perspective. When you are like working on like a highly executing team, like it is happening. What do you do to do that? Measure that.
I think the way to think about this is that, like, your latency of measurement is actually significant.
Mm-hmm.
Like the thing that that happens when you're actually in work, at work, in like a real in real life, like in the co-located environment, you have a very high bandwidth communication between you and the engineer, or between peer engineers and whatnot. So if actually someone's doing something wrong, or someone's actually going like stuck or going in a loop and things like that, the you can find it out very quickly, and like make that fix very quickly. Whereas in a remote world, what happens is that by the time you discover something is broken, there's already like a half hour that's passed, like an hour that has passed, like 2 hours that has passed. And the worst is like when you're actually dealing across time zones. Like, when I was in Amazon working with India, the team would actually do a bunch of things and they would waste the whole day. And sometimes like their Monday morning is wasted because like we don't work on Sundays, and they're like just waiting, right? So a lot of these time zone based issues and other things creep up. So I think the way to think about this is like, be very sensitive and mindful of what that latency is, and
Hmm.
why and how. What it means is that then you need to start thinking about autonomous processes. And then you
Mm-hmm.
need to actually set your entire thing as I mean, just like how you write a program. I'm an engineer at heart. So you write programs, you write like micro subroutines, and then you assemble those subroutines into like a bigger program, and then you assemble that into a bigger program. And then you have to make sure that each individual sub module, like my engineer should be able to work 3 to 6 hours without actually needing any inputs or anything from me. And they should just be able to automatically work, and whatnot. And then I want my tech leads to be able to police and monitor that. And then I just like touch base with the tech leads once a week. And if I don't course correct, I should not be losing a lot of time there. It's not about like, I need to set up mechanisms in place to be able to. I think you mentioned that tracking, monitoring, and also making sure that there's this inversion of control that actually makes a huge difference. Where what you do is
Yeah.
that rather than actually you pulling information, you empower them to push that information. So I'm going to assume everything is all right until and unless you tell me that you need my help about something else, and put them in the driver's seat. And I think with remote work, that is one significant skill that I think we will start valuing in the engineers. Like back in the real the old world setting where it's all like everybody's together and whatnot, I think we can get away with people being less of owners and more of like just executors. Whereas
Mm,
once you start moving into a remote world, I think I would value the ability to run things autonomously more than the ability to like your skill is slightly less optimized, less appreciated or valued as compared to like your ability to execute autonomously. That'll be my take.
this is this is very interesting. I think this touches upon this idea that like I was just going to ask about like accountability. Like people need to like start becoming owners, and like everybody who's a remote worker is like now you're like, and this goes on to like when you're hiring, how do you make sure that these people are accountable and everything as well? And so that's actually really good. And I also love that other point that you made about like how remote is making that latency of where you get this like the leading indicators that you get for like a good execution thing, it gets a little bit delayed, and like that adds up. And it's a great point to note, and processes setting up this is a great way to think about it. Love that answer. um, I want to ask, I want to like move on to like some couple of other topics over here, but before that I want to like run like a quick activity again. This is something that we usually do over here as well. Let's jump to this. And this is a would you rather question. And again, don't click on the answer yet. I want everybody else to like click on the answer and like, it's like say what their opinion is. Would you rather have a team with high competence or high commitment? And I think the way that this is phrased, people might think that like I'm saying that you can't have both. You can absolutely have both, but I am making a constraint over here to say that you have to choose between these two, just so that we can have a conversation about like why you think that. But you can absolutely have a committed team that's very competent as well, and that's what we want. But in this world, you can't do that. Vivek, what would you say you would choose? Hope everybody else has clicked the answer.
Yeah, I think my answer is actually, I think I kind of answered that earlier in a way, right? I mean, I actually index on ownership more than skill, because I think the whole point is that being predictable is a lot more useful than being performant. And that's been like one of the mantras that we used to have anywhere, right? It's I don't mind if you're slow. I just need to know how slow you are, and you just have to be predictable. Like as long as I know exactly what it's going to be, I can plan around it and make things work. If you're like sometimes like less predictable, sometimes like you're super fast, and sometimes you take more time, that becomes an issue. So I think for in order to be autonomous, the commitment has to be there, high degree of ownership and high degree of commitment. I mean, I don't think there is any other way around it.
I think that's a great answer. I feel like everybody, this doesn't seem like that much of a tough choice as I thought it would be, because everybody
Non-controversial.
else seems to be not very controversial. I didn't think that would be interesting. So yeah, I feel like only so now you can click and see what other people have said as well, Vivek, if you're curious. So again, I think like two people have said like high competence as opposed to like high commitment, which is quite telling. I have another would you rather question. Again, would you rather have engineers in your team have a strong work ethic or have strong communication skills? Again, not that you can't have both, but I am forcing you to choose between these two. Same deal. You talk about it, everybody else can click on it, and then we can see what people think.
See, this is going to be a tough one. I think this is going to be. I've not clicked on the answer yet, but I'm going to predict that this is going to probably split down the middle. And here is probably why. Like communication is the key from a remote work environment standpoint, because I think it's the barriers are it's just difficult. But that said, again, I go back to autonomy. Like a strong work ethic essentially goes back to you being accountable for the work that you're doing, and you're essentially going above and beyond and thinking on behalf of the greater good, as opposed to start thinking about like what's in it for me factor all the time. So I think uh, strong communication skills, like or rather lack of a strong communication skill, can be overcome by using other asynchronous mechanisms. Strong work ethic, if you don't have it, I think it's just impossible to come by that. Like it's difficult to inspire work ethic in people. So if I were to hire, I would actually focus on the work ethic way more than the communication skills. And I think I can manage not so great communication skills with process. So I would go with strong work ethic.
That's awesome. You were spot on. You literally broke the tie over there. We had like literally 40% until you just voted, and I love how you deduced at that, and it's like this turned out to be like more of a tougher choice question over here. Uh, may everybody I mean, I hope that nobody has to choose between these two and that you can get both, but I love how you deduced this. Love it. Yeah, and I think I'm gonna sort of double click on both of these things, right? Like the whole commitment slash motivation aspect of it. And I think we already spoke a little bit of this. Is when you're talking about a global team, what are some ways that you can help them feel like more committed, commitment to the work ethic as you were talking about, and also like commitment to the entire organization, the product, like the customer, all of that. It's like, just tell me about what steps have you taken and what should we be thinking about.
I don't think the mechanisms have changed from the in the old world and the new world order of sorts. I mean, it's still the same mechanisms. Like I think in order for someone to have a high commitment or high degree of like connection with what we're trying to work on, I think that's where the mission, vision, value, purpose. I mean, those statements still matter. And I think as leaders, I would encourage people to start thinking about like what's the problem you're trying to solve and why are you doing what you're doing and how you're doing it. Like what are the tenets or the guiding principles that let you make those decisions like on your own. So that way, as long as we agree on what the tenets are, then I think we can agree on what the outcome could be. We may disagree here and there, but then that essentially is a part of the autonomous entities that we're trying to encourage in engineers. So I think that part of it is fairly straightforward, has been the same for forever. And I think it's just all the more relevant in the new environment where you're actually looking at people being remote. So that's one. The second big thing that I actually would look at is I think the part where expectation setting and expectation management is
Mm,
very critical. Because the thing is that again, I go back to latency of like course correction and communication. If your engineer is not doing well or is not doing what you expect them to do, then by the time you correct them, it's going to be pretty late and
mm,
in a remote world. So which is why expectation setting is a lot more key. And like so you need to be super explicit about what the expectations are and how you're setting that. So I think those would be the two key things. One is the mission, vision, purpose, and whatnot to align the whole group. And the second one is like very, very clear expectation setting from an individual's perspective, so that everyone, whether it's an engineer or a manager, it doesn't matter. There's
nice.
very clear objective of what's important.
Nice. I want to ask more questions as to that, but I feel like Jay had a question that seems pretty relevant to that as well, right? Like we typically associate autonomy with seniority, senior engineers. How do you think about this for junior?
Very, very interesting question. I think, and I go back to my training at Amazon, where what they come back is like ownership. All the leadership principles are essentially not just like it says leadership principles, so should only leaders follow that or something like that?
Mm,
And not really. Leadership principles is for everyone. It's just a value system. It's a common grammar that people talk about. It's the same syntax that we are just following. So ownership is a virtue that I think we expect every engineer, every employee to essentially embody. Think like an owner, act like an owner, and essentially be autonomous, like take decisions. And it all starts with like empowering people to do certain things. I mean, be it things like expense reports, be it things like should you be taking decisions or not. Like one of the things that I frequently see is the bosses and the big bosses and the big bosses sometimes actually are micromanaging in the sense that
mm,
they are approving $5 expense reports. I'm like, no, just let the managers handle it, and then you can always use some kind of an audit mechanism or something to catch hold of that. I mean, it's not a again latency and course correction, right? What if somebody's siphoning off money and like they'll probably siphon off like 10 grand, 20 grand before you'll kind of catch up with that and like seal the loophole or do something with it. So not a big deal. And I think it'll be a waste of time for a VP or an SVP or a CEO or a CTO to be like looking at every line item in the expense report with a fine tooth comb or something. I mean, you're wasting a lot of time. So going back to as such the question about my thought process around autonomy is around empowering everyone to independently operate. Like they should know what the bounds of their decision is. Autonomy does not mean the wild west of sorts where they can do whatever they want, choose whatever and whatnot, right? It's not, autonomy is not anarchy. I mean, there is a subtle difference between the two, and I think it's, if you hold the definition of autonomy, it'll work for everybody.
I love it. I think one part that you mentioned, like sort of deeply, like struck a chord, is around letting it go and then course correct, and like the benefit of like doing that as opposed to like holding things close to heart. Love it. I think that's something that is a great takeaway there. This is great. So, sort of double clicking on some of the things that you mentioned earlier around you know the whole culture for people, whether they have a budget to like get people to meet in person, and how much of that plays a part in making people feel committed to the company and the bigger cause and the team, and sort of everything that builds along with that. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So so I just had my team meeting, end of, like, we had a Q1 get together, and I had a bunch of engineers fly in from, like, a bunch of different places. Like, a couple came from Texas, someone came from, like, Ottawa and whatnot. So the feedback I was actually getting and gathering was like, hey, we should do this again. Let's actually figure out what we should do and how. I think that the key takeaway that I had from that was essentially that even amongst engineers, it's actually very difficult to form that one-on-one relationship, and it's very difficult. Like, it's you're all like one I am away, but it's just that making that I am happen actually makes it difficult. And the second thing, of course, is that not everybody is the same. Like, in an I am chat, people don't realize that they're this warm or friendly or whatever else, and then and that's kind of where video chat kind of helps to some extent, but I think nothing, unfortunately, can beat the in-person interaction. But you don't need that every day.
Agree.
So that's
Yeah.
where I think that's where the difference is. Like, maybe doing it once a quarter, once a year, even having the whole team come together, spend like a 3-4 days together, would actually foster connections and relationships that actually would have taken forever to build otherwise. So I think it's tough to say what would be a good thing and what would be a bad story there. But my take is that the relationships that people build, I think it's almost irreplaceable, unless we come up with a maybe metaverse in the future will give you VR, AR, and all that stuff in the future. I don't know, but if that
Yeah.
happens, great. But until and unless we have that direct personal connection, which we get when we meet with people, that's interesting. Oh, by the way, the one of the biggest things that takeaways was that we actually were unable to predict people's heights. That was like a
Hike?
big thing. Height,
Did you
yeah,
say hike or height?
height, how tall they are.
Oh,
No
oh,
way. It's like, dude, like, I thought you were like 6 plus and you're like
More birds,
whatever.
man.
And then other way
yes.
around is that. So
Uh,
that was like a very common conversation. It's like, I always thought you were taller. I always thought you were shorter. And it's like, yeah, you're asking us, I thought you were. And so,
I
yeah,
love
yeah.
that.
that's
I
Yeah.
think
height is one thing that we're not able to figure out, at least in this
But
virtual world in which it's set up.
yeah,
Anyway,
I do agree with
I
you
love
on that, Vivek. When you do I am chats, the tone and the expressions don't come across. But then when you actually have a video chat, you can see people with their expressions and what they mean. And you can, a lot of the intent. Can somebody mute their phone if they're not talking?
Yeah, I'm just trying to see who has a. I'll mute them. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, yeah. So when there's a video chat, a lot of the intent and a lot of the a lot of the expressions, when you see that, it gets clear. So you establish that relationship and the trust more with video. Of course, nothing replaces in person, but just totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, I guess the height thing is like super cool, and I think it's so for people who know, I'm probably 6'7" or something. So just letting you know right now, because I can fake it. No, it's a great point. I think the whole aspects of psychological safety that gets built when you meet people in person and like seeing the human in them. We had like a couple of very interesting topics last week about like it's like the idea of like building empathy in the workplace and like all of that. I think it's resonating, and I feel like people start to value these one-off meetings a lot more because you actually don't meet these people otherwise, and like make real good use of that, as opposed to like how it used to be where like I'm going to show up for a couple of hours, get some drinks, and leave the place kind of thinking. So I think that's a really good point that you mentioned. I want to sort of jump ship to the world of another big area around like high performing engineering team, which is communication. And I think it's an important enough topic. We know that like work ethic trumps communication, at least in some ways, but at the same time, communication is important enough. And so how should and I think, right, like meetings are a big part that plays along with communication. We all love to hate meetings, and it's a thing that we do. So tell me a little bit more about like just asynchronous communication, synchronous communication, just taking these two things over here, and like how do you balance these?
Good question. I think, yeah, tough balancing act across. I've actually seen everyone that I know struggle with this, and I don't think there's a good answer. And I haven't seen anyone who's cracked the code there. But here are a few things that I think I've seen people do. One is bias towards async more than sync as much as possible, because that actually gives people the advantage and the time to like think about it, react, and things like that. So I think one of the things I've seen is like people use like Google Docs a lot, and they would, or like Quip back then would be the another one. So they'd share it around. People will comment on it, and then they'll respond to the comments. There'll be a lot of like asynchronous conversations happening. Gives everybody an opportunity to react to the activity before they actually start engaging on that. So that's interesting. I want to sync versus async. I think one of the things that I think why people attend meetings is probably sometimes FOMO driven, like fear of missing out, and that's like something that we want to make sure that we are addressing like head on. So the back when I was in the consulting world before my Amazon days, one of the things that actually I learned was essentially that you should not join meetings unless you're either adding value to the meeting or you're getting value out of the meeting. There's no point in joining a meeting otherwise. Like just being there and like marking present is no use to anyone, and nobody tracks your time, so it is irrelevant at this point, right? So that's was one of the big takeaways. And how I've seen that applied both at Amazon and Meta is that they actually have this whole conversation of like, what do you want to get out of this meeting? If you just want to know the information stream of like what was discussed, and you don't care about participating in the meeting, then just like listen to the meeting notes, or like just like plug into the meeting note stream that comes afterwards, and just having a good quality note taker, making sure that you're collaboratively editing and doing that, capturing the minutes of the meeting appropriately with action items is important. Like if you want to be a part of the decision making process, then you have to be in sync in many cases. But if you want to consume the decision or the output, then meeting notes are just good enough. And that only works if you trust the people in the meeting to capture high quality meeting notes and share. So I think one of the things that I've seen, I've talked to Arjun about this before, is that I think Zinc actually helps you create, as a part of the meeting, you record a bunch of different things and snapshots and whatnot, and then you don't feel like you're missing the meeting if you actually miss the meeting, if you're not contributing to it anyways. Like if you just want to be a passive listener, and how do I get the sound bites and the snapshots? I have actually seen some snippets from this tool. Like I think tooling will go a long way. Discipline definitely, but I think tooling can help with the discipline.
Super valuable. I mean, especially like the part about like, I mean, I'll address the second part over here. The ability to like automatically capture meetings, automatically generate highlights of it, and like take like a 5-minute takeaways from this is super interesting in itself. And I think you touched upon like a really good point about like sort of purposeful meetings. And when you say purposeful meetings, it's also taking into account who should attend the meeting, and like be very deliberate about it, and like who should not attend the meeting, and like have people who don't attend the meeting a way to uh, capture the meeting as well. I love that idea. And I think um, I feel like asynchronous and synchronous, as you rightly said, like we don't have like quite a bit of a balance over here. But tooling has a long way to go. I mean, it has a long way to go, and I think it can like close the gap over there for sure.
Yes.
I love that. And if anybody else has like a comment or like wants to add to this, feel free to raise your hand. There's a raise your hand button as a part of the Q&A over there. Or if you want to ask an anonymous question as well, you can do that on the widget over there on the right, in case if you don't want to put a face to your question. That's totally fine as well. Yeah, so I think we're getting more closer to the end of this show over here, but maybe maybe like one last question. Again, like this is, I'm gonna like jump to a last question unless anybody else has other questions that they want to ask Vivek while we're still here. Going once, going twice. Okay. So this question that I would like just broadly phrase over here, again, this is something that I want to solicit everybody's answer as well, is like, when you think about strong engineering culture, what do you think are the elements of that? And this, take it as broad, and this may not be relevant to just fully remote as well, but just take it broad and say like, this company has a good engineering culture because of this, and this.
I think if I were to distill at least my understanding of what a good engineering culture would look like, I think it's two things. One is essentially respect for what came before. You walk into an organization, and then you would see tons and tons and tons of things wrong with it, and you have to start with start with respect. I mean, uh, just because it's like a big company, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, whatever, you would see ton and tons of, like, bad quality software there, and it's there for specific reasons. It's actually evolved over time and things like that. So that understanding why it's been that way is actually helpful, and that's like respecting what came before is actually one of the fundamental aspects of that. And the flip side of actually is to create an inclusive environment where people can ask questions and propose ideas, and no idea is small, no idea is insignificant. I mean, even if it's like, yeah, been there, done that, that won't work in this environment. But you have to understand that the new folks do not have the luxury of the historic context, and it is the culture in the team has to be that you're actually constantly imparting that context to the newer engineers. So I think it kind of is the same. I think it goes back to communication actually, to a large extent. It's all about being respectful about what is there before you, and it's also being respectful to new folks who are actually coming in with new ideas, and that's pretty much how you move forward. So that'll be my take on this.
This is great. Okay, we have time for another couple of people to just come in really short, really quick. What other things? Prakash, come on up. Like, what is a real quick way that you can say is a strong engineering culture?
In addition to what Vivek said, one of the things I have seen is a non-punitive culture, right? You're not as soon as engineers realize that they're going to be punished, like if a Jira ticket, or if something goes back 3 times, if they fear that they're going to be fired, they're going to know how to cheat the system. They're going to know how what not to do, have check-ins done in a very conservative way. It's going to affect the product finally. So
Love
creating
it.
letting them know that, I mean, unless they do something really stupid, it's not going to be punitive, right? That kind of helps from a culture perspective. But in some way, that's a part of being inclusive, right? Trying to understand and be empathetic. But it's important to bring that out to, I think.
Great answer. I feel like the high psychological safety is the key to it, that no idea is insignificant and no idea is wrong. Like, being or doing something shouldn't land you in trouble. Like, it's okay to do things. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be, wrong many times. And that's a great culture. I totally agree with that, Prakash. That's a super input. Anyone else wants to add value to this? Because I think this is key things over here. I feel like this section that you're recording right now is going to be adding a lot of value to people who are remote leaders, who are trying to build a good engineering culture, to like make sure that they strive by it. I think going once, we're already like at 45 minutes of the show. Jay has one more last. Okay, Jay, last word, quick.
Yeah, so not seeing major engineering silos. There is this concept of information free flowing across the company where engineers more or less know how things. I mean, obviously there will be experts, area experts, but the expertise is some kind of democratized in some way where people can break past expertise and also become an expert. There's no barrier to becoming an expert, but you will see silos, but those silos aren't restricted.
Fantastic point. The level of like transparency and the level of ability to move between different areas, and no politics of sense of ownership, my ground, my stake, and like information is free flowing. I love that. That's great culture to strive towards. Love all these answers. And with that, folks, we come to the end of the show. Thank you, Vivek. I feel like I have to totally give it to you for like making this a very, very high clarity show over here. And for folks who are doing this for the first time, there is a top takeaways from today that you can actually type over here. Before you go, please go ahead and write what did you take away from today's meeting. Vivek, thank you for being here again. Wait, I think you're muted, Vivek.
Yeah, it was fun. Actually, I think it's always fun to reflect on some of these concepts and topics. I mean, you kind of you're on autopilot as a manager, and you kind of do a lot of these things without thinking too much about it, and having these conversations and these insightful questions is what makes you pause and think. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, and I think rightly so. Just being able to capture this, so that what we think are obvious to us, and when somebody is questioning and you're verbalizing it, it makes it, first of all, solidify, and also makes for great content for people to go and read and make life great for them. And so super useful for everybody around. Thanks, folks. Thanks for attending today's show. Deb, Gauri, Prakash, you are coming to Zinc for the first time, attending one of these shows. We look forward to seeing you again next week and the weeks forward. Any top thoughts for you that you want to share, takeaways from today that you obviously can type, but anything else that you want to share, either about what Vivek said, about the topic, or about Zinc, the platform, or about the Fully Remote Talk Show in general?
I'm not too conversant with the Zinc platform itself. I wanted to first come here and see what's being discussed here. I do a lot of remote working and I manage people remotely, so I found it very relevant. So I thought I'll come in and just hear in and see what's going on, and it was very informational. I think I've spoken to Vivek once before. And I guess he's got his ideas are very compartmentalized and he's very clear in his thoughts. So it was a pleasure to hear him, and good to know you guys. So thank you very much. I learned a lot.
Thanks, Prakash. We loved having you over here, and looking forward to having you part of more of these conversations as well.
Absolutely. Is it every Thursday at this time, or is it different times?
Every Thursday, we pick topics that are relevant for a leader who's fully remote. Like last week, we spoke with somebody who was exclusively about how do you build empathy in the workplace. We've talked about how remote workers feel isolated. How do you build connectedness? We've talked about managing conflict when people are fully remote. We've talked about many topics largely related with communication, largely related with problems that are arising because people are being remote. And we record these shows. You should be able to see the recording of all these past shows as well, and you should receive a link right after this.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Awesome, folks. Cool. All right, feel free to stand back over here and chat as we usually do. Otherwise, we'll see you next week, same time. Good show, Vivek. I'm gonna stop